The scent of champagne and cruelty hung thick in the air of the Metropolitan Grand Ballroom. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's homes cast dancing shadows across marble floors, so polished they reflected the ugly truth of human nature. 200 of the city's most powerful elites mingled in their $1,000 gowns and tailored suits, their laughter sharp as broken glass, their smiles cold as winter graves. None of them noticed the figure that materialized at the grand entrance like a specter from another world. He stood there for a full 30 seconds before anyone saw him, a ghost made flesh, wrapped in an army surplus jacket that had seen better decades. His boots, cracked and weathered, left dusty prints on the pristine marble, each footstep a small act of defiance against their sterile perfection. Gray hair hung in unkempt tangles around a face carved by hardship, and pale blue eyes held depths that spoke of battles fought in places these people couldn't pronounce. The silence spread like ripples in a pond as heads turned and conversations died. The transformation was instantaneous, from refined elegance to predatory alertness. They smelled weakness the way sharks smell blood in the water. Security. The voice belonged to Marcus Blackwood, a real estate mogul whose empire was built on the bones of demolished low-income housing. His face, handsome in a cruel, sharp way, twisted with disgust. How did this vagrant get past the doors? The old man seemed not to hear the rising tide of hostility. His gaze swept the room with the calm assessment of a soldier surveying enemy territory. He saw the glittering jewelry, the sneering faces, the casual cruelty that dripped from their every gesture. He saw everything, and he remembered. "Please," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper that somehow carried across the vast space. "I don't want charity, I saw the piano." His eyes found the magnificent Steinway concert grand that sat like a sleeping giant in the center of the ballroom. "Can I play it for a plate of food?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. For a moment there was only stunned silence. Then Marcus Blackwood threw back his head and roared with laughter, a sound like breaking bones. The crowd followed his lead, their mirth washing over the old veteran in waves of humiliation. But the man stood his ground, his expression unreadable, his gaze fixed on the piano with an intensity that made several people in the front rows shift uncomfortably. Something about his stillness, his quiet dignity in the face of their mockery, felt dangerous. Near the service entrance, a young waitress named Sarah Martinez watched with her heart breaking in her chest. She was 23, working 3 jobs to pay for her mother's cancer treatments, and she recognized the look in the old man's eyes. Her grandfather had worn the same expression after he came back from Vietnam, the look of a man who had given everything and was now being asked to beg for scraps. She started to move toward him, a glass of water trembling in her hand, but the hotel manager grabbed her arm with fingers that bit like talons. "Don't you dare, Sarah," he hissed, his eyes darting toward the wealthiest tables. "He's not our problem. Get involved and you'll be cleaning toilets at truck stops." Sarah froze, torn between her conscience and her desperate need for employment. Her eyes met the old man's for a fleeting second, and she tried to convey an apology, a flicker of solidarity. But he was already turning his attention back to the crowd, back to the game he was playing, a game none of them understood. "Security!" Marcus shouted again, his face flushed with indignation and expensive whiskey. "Remove this creature before he contaminates our event. We paid for exclusivity, not to be accosted by street trash who think they can wander in here and beg for handouts." 2 massive men in black suits began moving from opposite sides of the room, their approach as inevitable as death itself. The crowd quieted, anticipating the sad spectacle of his removal, but the old man simply raised one weathered hand, not in surrender, but with an authority that made the guards pause, confusion flickering across their faces. "Just one song," he said, his voice steady and calm, directed at Marcus. "That's all I ask, for a hot meal. I haven't eaten in 3 days." It was a lie, carefully constructed. He'd eaten a perfectly adequate dinner at his private club just hours earlier. But he needed to see them for who they truly were. He needed to witness what lay beneath their polished surfaces when they thought no one of consequence was watching. This entire evening was a test, and the subjects had no idea they were being graded. Marcus's cruel smile widened. 3 days and you think that's our concern? The world is full of lazy parasites like you who refuse to work, who make bad choices, and end up on the street. It's called personal responsibility. Maybe you should try it sometime. He's absolutely right, chimed in Victoria Sterling, adjusting her diamond necklace worth more than most people's homes. We all worked hard to be in this room. We earned our success through merit and determination. Nobody handed us anything. The old veteran almost smiled. He knew for a fact that Victoria had inherited her pharmaceutical fortune and nearly destroyed the company with her incompetence before being bailed out by the board of directors. And Marcus hadn't worked a truly hard day in his pampered life. The old man knew their stories better than they knew them themselves. He played his part, letting his shoulders slump in feigned defeat. "I've tried, sir," he murmured, his voice thick with manufactured despair. "But nobody wants to hire an old man like me. They say I'm not good for anything anymore." "And they're right," Marcus snapped, stepping closer now. The smell of expensive scotch wafted from him like toxic perfume. "Look at you, filthy, broken, worthless. What value could you possibly bring to anyone? Your place is on a street corner with a cardboard sign, not in here among people who actually contribute to society. People who matter." "People who matter," the old man echoed, his voice suddenly losing its tremor. It was a subtle shift, but several guests noticed. "And what is it that makes a person matter, sir?" "Exactly what you lack," Marcus declared, jabbing a manicured finger through the air. "Merit, success, achievement. We deserve to be here because we've proven our worth. You're nothing but a drain on society, a ghost haunting the edges of a world you failed to conquer." The old man's eyes drifted back to the gleaming Steinway. It sat there like a silent judge, its polished surface reflecting the ugly scene unfolding around it. "One song," he repeated, his voice a quiet plea. "That's all I need to prove myself." "You probably don't even know which end of the piano to sit at," someone jeered from the crowd, triggering a ripple of cruel laughter. "He'll ruin the ivory with those grimy hands," another voice added, followed by murmurs of disgusted agreement. Marcus's eyes suddenly lit up with malicious inspiration. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face as he held up his hands for silence. "You know what?" he announced, his voice booming with false magnanimity. "Let's let him play." A confused murmur swept through the room. "That's right," Marcus continued, climbing onto his chair to address the entire ballroom like a Roman emperor addressing the Colosseum. "Let's give my guest a chance, an opportunity to entertain us." He savored the moment, the absolute power he felt as 200 pairs of eyes focused on him. "Here's the deal." He pointed at the old veteran with theatrical flourish. "You play us one song. If you can somehow manage to get through it without sounding like a dying animal, I will personally buy you the most expensive meal on our menu." The crowd buzzed with anticipation, sensing the theatrical cruelty of the game. "But," Marcus added, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast room, "when you fail, and we all know you will fail, spectacularly, you will be escorted out by security in front of everyone here, and you will crawl back to whatever gutter spawned you, and we will all witness what happens when false hope meets cold reality." The old man, whose real name was Professor Edmund Hartwell, though none of them would learn that tonight, felt his pulse quicken, not with fear but with a cold, thrilling sense of anticipation. The trap was set. The first movement of his symphony of justice was about to begin. The circle of expectant faces around him felt like a Roman amphitheater, and he was the gladiator they had all come to see devoured. He could taste their hunger for his humiliation, a hunger that would soon transform into something else entirely. "Place your bets, ladies and gentlemen," Marcus shouted, turning the moment into a grotesque spectator sport. "How many notes do you think our virtuoso here can play before he gives up in shame?" "I'll give him 10 seconds, yelled a tech mogul from the back, raising his champagne glass in mock salute. $500 says he can't even play a proper scale, laughed a socialite dripping in diamonds, her voice like the tinkling of ice in an expensive crystal glass. Edmund moved toward the piano with a carefully practiced shuffle, every step calculated to reinforce their assumptions. He made his hands tremble as he approached the magnificent instrument, his rough, calloused fingers looking shockingly out of place against the flawless black lacquer. "Be careful with that instrument," the hotel manager squeaked from the sidelines, wringing his hands. "That piano's worth more than you'll ever see in your pathetic lifetime, old man." Another wave of laughter rolled through the room, but this time Edmund noticed it wasn't universal. He saw Sarah, the young waitress, watching from the kitchen entrance, her face a mask of shame for the crowd and sympathy for him. One of the security guards shifted uncomfortably. Even a few of the older guests looked away, faint blushes of embarrassment coloring their faces. But Marcus was basking in it, settling into a velvet chair at the edge of the stage like a king at a public execution. "Before you begin," Marcus announced, his voice dripping with condescension, "let me make the terms even more interesting." He paused for maximum effect. "If, by some impossible miracle, you actually manage to impress us, let's say you play well enough to make someone in this room shed a single tear of genuine emotion, I'll triple the offer. Not just a meal, but $3,000 cash." The ballroom erupted in delighted cruelty. $3,000 was nothing to these people. A bar tab, a tip for good service, the cost of a new handbag. Offering it as a grand prize was a way of saying that the man's ultimate impossible achievement was worth less than their pocket change. $3,000, someone bellowed. "He'll probably faint just thinking about that much money." Edmund sat on the leather bench, feigning awkwardness while inwardly smiling. He knew this Steinway model intimately. He had one just like it in the music room of his estate in the hills, a place none of these people knew existed. But tonight, he was not the world-renowned pianist Edmund Hartwell. He was a ghost, a mirror, reflecting their own forgotten humanity back at them. "What masterpiece will you be gracing us with?" Marcus sneered. "Chopsticks? Maybe Mary Had a Little Lamb? It's probably the only tune you know." More laughter. Edmund remained silent, staring down at the 88 keys as if they were an ancient, indecipherable text. He needed them to underestimate him completely. He needed their arrogance at its absolute peak before he began to dismantle it, note by devastating note. "Cat got your tongue?" a woman taunted from her table near the front. "Probably illiterate," Marcus declared loudly, playing to his audience. "No formal education, no musical training. But we must be patient, mustn't we? We can't expect much from a man who has clearly wasted every opportunity life ever gave him." Edmund slowly lifted his head, his pale blue eyes finding Marcus's. "Opportunities," he murmured, his voice just loud enough to be heard in the sudden quiet. "Oh, he speaks." Marcus clapped his hands in sarcastic delight. "Yes, opportunities. The chances we're all given to make something of ourselves. Everyone in this room seized theirs. That's why we're here." He gestured grandly at the opulent surroundings. "And you're there." "And where were you born?" Edmund asked softly, his voice carrying clearly in the acoustically perfect room. The question caught Marcus off guard. "What does that matter?" "Just curious," Edmund said, his eyes scanning the faces of the other guests. "Where did all of you grow up? What schools did you attend? What doors were opened for you before you even knew how to knock?" A palpable discomfort began to ripple through the ballroom. While some present were genuinely self-made, many, like Marcus, were the products of immense privilege, born into worlds of private schools, family connections, and inherited wealth that they had never acknowledged as advantages. "That's irrelevant," Marcus snapped, his composure starting to fray at the edges. "What matters is what we did with what we were given." "And what did I do with what I was given?" Edmund asked, his voice still gentle but somehow more penetrating than before. "Clearly nothing." Marcus exploded, his voice raw with contempt that seemed to surprise even himself with its viciousness. "Look at yourself, man. You are a complete and utter failure. A nobody. A waste of space and oxygen who contributes nothing to the world except misery and the stench of defeat." The words hung in the air like poison gas. their venom shocking even some of the more callous guests. Marcus had crossed a line, moving from casual cruelty to something deeply personal and brutal. Edmund looked down at his hands, hands that had once commanded standing ovations from audiences at Carnegie Hall, hands that had moved critics to tears, hands that had channeled the souls of the greatest composers who ever lived. Then he placed them gently over the keys. A hush fell over the room like a burial shroud. This was it. 200 people waited for his failure, for the final confirmation of their own superiority. They waited for the dissonant, clumsy notes that would prove that some people were simply worth less than others. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, something fundamental had changed. The vacant, defeated look was gone, replaced by a focus so intense, so profound, that several people in the front row shifted uncomfortably in their seats without understanding why. "What song is it going to be?" Marcus demanded again, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. It was now tinged with an inexplicable nervousness, as if some primal instinct was warning him that he had awakened something he didn't understand. Edmund took a slow, deep breath. "A song about promises," he said quietly. "One I learned a very long time ago. A friend taught it to me, in a place very far from here." "How touching," Marcus sneered, trying to regain control of the narrative. "A little sob story to win our sympathy. Well, it won't work. Now play your pathetic little tune so we can get this charade over with." Edmund pressed his right index finger down on a single key. Middle C. The note that emerged from the Steinway was not the uncertain amateur sound they all expected. It was perfect. Pure, resonant, and impossibly clear, hanging in the silent air like a drop of liquid starlight. It was a note played by fingers that knew the soul of a piano, filled with a quiet, sorrowful beauty that cut through the room's cynical atmosphere like a blade through silk. He held the note for 5 full seconds, letting its power and mystery sink into every person in the room. When he finally lifted his finger, the silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of cruel anticipation. It was the silence of genuine surprise tinged with the first whisper of unease. "Beginner's luck," Marcus muttered, but uncertainty flickered across his face like candle flame in wind. That single note had been played with the kind of control that took decades to master, not luck. Edmund's hands moved again, his fingers finding the keys with the grace of a dancer, the precision of a surgeon, the soul of a poet. He played another note, then a third, weaving them together into a simple, haunting melody that seemed to emerge from the piano like morning mist from a lake. It wasn't Beethoven or Chopin. It was something they didn't recognize, something that sounded like an old folk song born in mountains and prairies, simple yet infused with profound longing and loss. The melody spoke of rain-soaked battlefields and letters never sent home, of faces lost too soon and promises that could never be kept. "What is that?" someone whispered. "I've never heard that before." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowed in concentration. This wasn't going according to plan. A homeless vagrant wasn't supposed to know how to play with such feeling, such control. He was supposed to bang on the keys like a child, creating a cringe-worthy spectacle. He was supposed to fail. The melody began to build. Edmund's left hand joined in, adding deep resonant chords that gave the music a foundation of earth and sorrow. The Steinway responded to his touch like a living thing, every note clear as mountain air, every harmony rich as aged wine. His fingers, rough and weathered though they appeared, moved over the ivory and ebony with a familiarity that could only come from a lifetime of devotion. He was still holding back, reining in the full force of his abilities, giving them just enough to shatter their expectations without revealing his true identity. It was a masterful game of revelation, and the entire room had become his unwilling audience. "He must have heard it on the radio," Marcus said tightly, trying to provide a logical explanation that would shrink the old man back down to manageable size. Anyone can memorize a simple tune. But even as he spoke, Marcus knew it was a lie. He could see the subtle shifts in tempo, the delicate control of the pedals, the way Edmund leaned into certain chords to give them more emotional weight. This wasn't mimicry. This was artistry. The haunting melody filled every corner of the ballroom, seeping into the souls of everyone present like water into parched earth. A strange transformation began to work on the crowd. The whispers stopped, waiters froze in place, their trays of champagne forgotten. Security guards turned from their posts, faces slack with wonder. The music was a magnet, pulling every fragment of attention toward the shabby old man at the piano. He's actually quite skilled, a woman admitted reluctantly, her voice filled with unwilling awe. Edmund's hands moved again, his fingers finding the keys with the grace of a dancer, the precision of a surgeon, the soul of a poet. He played another note, then a third, weaving them together into a simple, haunting melody that seemed to emerge from the piano like morning mist from a lake. It wasn't Beethoven or Chopin. It was something they didn't recognize, something that sounded like an old folk song born in mountains and prairies, simple yet infused with profound longing and loss. The melody spoke of rain-soaked battlefields and letters never sent home, of faces lost too soon and promises that could never be kept. "What is that?" someone whispered. "I've never heard that before." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowed in concentration. This wasn't going according to plan. A homeless vagrant wasn't supposed to know how to play with such feeling, such control. He was supposed to bang on the keys like a child, creating a cringe-worthy spectacle. He was supposed to fail. The melody began to build. Edmund's left hand joined in, adding deep, resonant chords that gave the music a foundation of earth and sorrow. The Steinway responded to his touch like a living thing, every note clear as mountain air, every harmony rich as aged wine. His fingers, rough and weathered though they appeared, moved over the ivory and ebony with a familiarity that could only come from a lifetime of devotion. He was still holding back, reining in the full force of his abilities, giving them just enough to shatter their expectations without revealing his true identity. It was a masterful game of revelation, and the entire room had become his unwilling audience. "He must have heard it on the radio," Marcus said tightly, trying to provide a logical explanation that would shrink the old man back down to manageable size. Anyone can memorize a simple tune. But even as he spoke, Marcus knew it was a lie. He could see the subtle shifts in tempo, the delicate control of the pedals, the way Edmund leaned into certain chords to give them more emotional weight. This wasn't mimicry. This was artistry. The haunting melody filled every corner of the ballroom, seeping into the souls of everyone present like water into parched earth. A strange transformation began to work on the crowd. The whispers stopped. Waiters froze in place, their trays of champagne forgotten. Security guards turned from their posts, faces slack with wonder. The music was a magnet, pulling every fragment of attention toward the shabby old man at the piano. He's actually quite skilled," a woman admitted reluctantly, her voice filled with unwilling awe. "Skilled?" Marcus hissed, keeping his voice low. "It's a parlor trick designed to manipulate our emotions." But the lie was wearing thin. The music was becoming more complex, more demanding. Edmund began to weave a second melody into the first, a counterpoint that required dexterity no amateur could ever possess. For just a moment he allowed a flicker of his true virtuosity to show through. His fingers became a blur, flying across the keys in a cascade of brilliant, perfect notes that made several people gasp audibly. For 30 seconds he played like the world-class concert pianist he truly was. The sound was breathtaking. A torrent of musical genius as shocking as, "It was beautiful, and why not, Marcus?" Mr. Stone turned to face him, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Marcus's sputtering rage. "What law of nature or society says that a man who has fallen on hard times cannot also possess extraordinary gifts?" "Education," Marcus spat, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. "Opportunity, money, training, he has none of those things. You need resources to learn an instrument like this. You need access to proper instruction, to conservatories, to—" "Access to what exactly?" Edmund interrupted softly, his hands still resting on the keys. His voice cut through Marcus's tirade like a scalpel, silencing him mid-sentence. Marcus sputtered, momentarily speechless. Too expensive schools? Edmund continued, his eyes sweeping across the watching crowd. To private tutors and conservatory training? His voice remained gentle, but there was steel beneath the silk now. With respect, sir, you don't learn music in fancy institutions. You learn it by living. You learn it by suffering. You learn it when the melody in your head is the only thing standing between you and madness. You learn it when you have nothing left but the need to express what cannot be spoken. His words resonated through the ballroom like ripples in still water. Several guests found themselves nodding, moved by the simple truth of his statement. They were words that exposed the poverty of Marcus's worldview, the shallow assumptions upon which he had built his entire identity. "Play again, Mr. Stone requested softly. "Please." Edmund turned back to the piano, and as he began his second piece, something fundamental shifted. The mask of the humble beggar began to slip away, and the passion he had been carefully containing started to bleed through into the music like ink through water. He chose Chopin this time, the Revolutionary Etude. It was a piece born of fury and heartbreak, of desperate love for a homeland that no longer existed. It was a declaration of war against injustice, a cry of defiance that had echoed through concert halls for over a century. The first thunderous chord crashed through the ballroom like artillery fire, making people jump in their seats. What followed was a tempest, a furious, swirling storm of notes that spoke of struggle and rebellion, of beauty born from rage and hope carved from despair. It was impossibly fast, impossibly complex, and Edmund played it with a fire that was both terrifying and beautiful to behold. His fingers flew across the keys with superhuman precision, every note perfect, every phrase shaped with the skill of a master craftsman and the passion of a true artist. Marcus watched with growing horror, his face ashen. The knot of panic in his stomach tightened until he could barely breathe. This was no longer a game of humiliation. This was something else entirely, a revelation that threatened to shatter everything he believed about the world and his place in it. The old man at the piano was not just playing music. He was dismantling Marcus's entire belief system with every note. The system that said wealth equaled worth, that poverty equaled failure, that some people simply mattered less than others. This worthless vagrant was demonstrating a power, a genius, a value that Marcus knew he could never possess, no matter how much money he accumulated or how many buildings he built. "Stop it," Marcus yelled, taking an unsteady step toward the stage. "I said stop." But his voice was swallowed by the magnificent fury of Chopin's masterpiece. No one was listening to him anymore. They were all prisoners of the man at the piano, held captive by music that spoke directly to their souls. The performance had ceased to be a plea for food. It had become a judgment, and everyone in that room, especially Marcus, was being weighed in the balance and found wanting the revolutionary. Etude built to its climactic crescendo, each phrase more powerful than the last. Edmund's entire being seemed to merge with the music, his body swaying with the rhythm, his face transformed by an inner light that made him appear decades younger. This was what he had been born to do, what his hands had been crafted for, what his soul demanded. The technical difficulty of the piece was staggering. It was a work that challenged even the most accomplished concert pianists, requiring not just speed and accuracy, but profound musical understanding. Yet Edmund played it as if it were as natural as breathing, as if the piano were an extension of his own body. In the audience, something extraordinary was happening. The cruel, mocking crowd was being transformed by the sheer power of genuine artistry. Some wept openly, overwhelmed by emotions they couldn't name. Others sat in stunned silence, their assumptions about class and worth crumbling around them like ancient walls in an earthquake. Victoria Sterling, the pharmaceutical heiress who had inherited more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes, found herself thinking about her own grandfather, a pharmacist who had worked 16-hour days in a tiny shop, whose hands had been as rough and weathered as the old man's at the piano. When had she stopped seeing value in people like him? When had wealth become her only measure of human worth? Dr. Jonathan Hayes, a renowned surgeon whose skill had saved countless lives, watched the old man's fingers dance across the keys with professional appreciation. Those hands moved with the same precision he used to perform delicate operations, the same years of training evident in every gesture. How many assumptions had he made about patients based on their appearance? How many stories had he never bothered to learn? Even the security guards stood transfixed, their orders forgotten. One of them, a former Marine named Rodriguez, recognized something in the old man's bearing, the way he held himself despite his humble circumstances, the quiet dignity that no amount of hardship could erase. He had seen that same look in the mirror after returning from his own tours overseas. But Marcus Blackwood was beyond redemption. The music that was healing others was tormenting him, each note a reminder of his own spiritual poverty. He had built his entire identity on the foundation that money and status determined human value, and that foundation was now cracking beneath the weight of undeniable truth. "This is enough," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Security, remove this man immediately. He's disturbing the peace. He's trespassing." But nobody moved. The security guards looked at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. Even the hotel staff seemed frozen, caught between their professional obligations and their human hearts. The revolutionary etude reached its thunderous conclusion, a series of crashing chords that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Edmund's hands lifted from the keys, and once again, profound silence filled the space. But this time, it lasted only for a heartbeat before erupting into something unprecedented. Applause. Not the polite, obligatory clapping of a charity function, but genuine, thunderous appreciation. It started with Abraham Stone, who rose to his feet with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Sarah the waitress joined him, no longer caring about her job security. Dr. Hayes stood next, then Victoria Sterling, then dozens of others throughout the room. Within moments, nearly the entire ballroom was on its feet, applauding with an intensity that shook the crystal chandeliers. They were not just applauding the performance. They were applauding their own awakening, their recognition of beauty and worth in the most unexpected place. Marcus stood alone in the sea of standing ovation, his face twisted with rage and something darker, the dawning realization that he had been wrong about everything that mattered. "Sit down," he bellowed at his fellow guests. "He's nobody. He's worthless." But his words were lost in the thunder of appreciation. The old veteran had done more than play a beautiful piece of music. He had revealed the content of their characters, both his own and theirs. In doing so, he had proven that true worth had nothing to do with bank accounts or social status. Abraham Stone approached the stage, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the ongoing applause, that was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. "I've been a patron of the arts for 4 decades, and I've rarely heard Chopin played with such passion and precision. You have a gift that transcends, well, it transcends everything." Edmund looked up at him with gratitude and something else, a flicker of the man he truly was beginning to show through his carefully constructed persona. "Thank you, sir. Music has been my salvation. In the darkest times, it was the only light I could find." "Where did you study?" asked Dr. Hayes, who had approached the stage as well. "Juilliard? Curtis? Moscow Conservatory?" A sad smile touched Edmund's lips. "I studied wherever I could, doctor. In army barracks when the shooting stopped, in field hospitals between surgeries, in refugee camps where children needed to hear something beautiful instead of explosions. You don't always need a conservatory to learn music. Sometimes you just need to need it badly enough." The crowd fell silent again, hanging on his every word. This was not the rambling of a homeless vagrant. This was eloquence, wisdom, depth of character that spoke to experiences most of them could barely imagine. Marcus, however, refused to accept what was happening before his eyes. His world was built on clear hierarchies, simple categories that made sense of everything. Rich people mattered, poor people didn't. Success equaled worth, failure equaled worthlessness. This old man was shattering those categories, and Marcus felt his entire identity dissolving. "You're all being played," he shouted, climbing onto his chair to address the crowd. "Don't you see what he's doing? He's manipulating you with cheap sentiment and a parlor trick. He probably learned that piece from a YouTube video." But even as he spoke, Marcus knew how foolish he sounded. YouTube videos didn't teach the kind of musical sensitivity they had just witnessed. They didn't create the depth of interpretation that had moved a room full of cynics to tears. "Marcus," Abraham Stone said quietly, his voice carrying clearly, in the sudden hush, "perhaps it's time to consider that your understanding of human value might be incomplete." "My understanding?" Marcus's voice rose to nearly a shriek. "My understanding built an empire. My understanding created jobs and wealth and progress. What has his understanding accomplished? Look at him, he's a failure. A broken-down old man who couldn't make it in the real world." Edmund stood slowly from the piano bench, and for the first time that evening, he showed his full height. Still impressive despite his age, still carrying the bearing of a man who had commanded respect in other circumstances. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice now carrying an authority that made several people step back instinctively, "may I ask what you consider the real world?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus sputtered, caught off guard by the old man's sudden change in demeanor. "The world of business, of competition, of results and profits and what about the world of service?" Edmund interrupted, his pale blue eyes now blazing with inner fire. "The world where young men and women sacrifice their safety, their health, their peace of mind to protect those who sleep safely in their beds. The world where art and music and literature remind us what we're living for, what makes us human instead of merely clever animals." His voice was growing stronger, more commanding with each word. The mask was slipping further, revealing glimpses of the true man beneath, a man of education, culture, depth, and moral authority that Marcus could never hope to match. "I've seen your real world, Mr. Blackwood. I've seen what happens when profit becomes the only measure of value. I've walked through neighborhoods you destroyed to build your monuments to greed. I've met families you displaced without a second thought. I've witnessed the human cost of your success, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, you may have built an empire, but you failed as a human being." The ballroom was dead silent now. Edmund's words cut through the elegant atmosphere, like truth through pretension, laying bare the moral bankruptcy that lay at the heart of Marcus's philosophy. Marcus's face went through a spectrum of colors, red with rage, white with shock, green with nausea as the implications of Edmund's words sank in. You can't talk to me like that. I don't have to listen to this from some homeless nobody." "Then don't,"